Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. The topic is personality, personal intelligence, and coping with challenging times. I'm Jen Woodside, a director in alumni relations here at UNH. We really hope that everyone is well. We will have more webinars in June, so check your email inbox, our website, and social media channels and learn more about them. We'll have them a couple times a week throughout June and probably July as well. I'm joined today by Joan Glutting, a clinical professor of psychology, and John Mayer, a professor of psychology. Both are faculty in the College of Liberal Arts here at UNH. And Joan is actually an alum and a UNH Wildcat. They are here to show us how using our people-centered intelligences, such as our emotional and personal intelligence, can be helpful in identifying coping patterns during these challenging times. We will have a question and answer period at the end. If you have questions, please type them at any time into the Q&A box. You'll find it at the bottom of your screen, and we will see them there, and we'll be able to answer your questions at the end of the presentation. It's helpful to use the Q&A box instead of the chat because sometimes they can be missed on the chat. So if you have questions, that's the place to put them. And with that, I will turn it over to our presenters. Thanks.
Thank you, Jen, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us I guess we're in the afternoon, for this afternoon as of 6 minutes ago. Dr. Glutting and I would especially like to extend our thanks to Jen and to Phoebe Moore, who both have been really helpful in getting us scheduled and prepared to carry this out. We thought it might be helpful to begin because we can't see you. We'd love to see you today, but we have to interact with you. We know you're there. To start with a brief poll. You don't have to answer anything that feels uncomfortable, but we're going to ask you like your present status in this in this new stay-at-home world, and a little bit about how you're feeling today. So I think there are about 3 questions, maybe 4 questions in there. Okay, so I'm not sure you can see this, but we've got about a quarter of the people who are staying at home, about 60% who are working online. Only 10% are leaving home to go to work at this point, and 2% of our group, probably a little bit low in terms of what's going on outside, feel furloughed or are furloughed or laid off. And I guess
We're just going into the next poll that talks about the 4 areas you're doing the best in.
okay, so about 37% of our audience is here for the information. And then some people feel kind of like they're doing well in terms of their motives and emotions. About 13% are feeling like they're doing well in terms of their knowledge and what they need to know. About 23% feel that they're acting well, and about 6% feel their self-control is doing well. So that's interesting to hear too.
And then the last poll, which I can see people are quickly taking to kind of see where people are feeling challenged right now.
You know? Suppose I should answer this too. Okay, and so people are feeling challenged in their motives and emotions area. It looks like most of all at 32%. We've got 26% just here for the information. 11% would like to know a little bit more or feel like their knowledge isn't quite ready. About 20% would feel like they would like some help in planning well and carrying out plans. And about 10% just feel like they're challenged in terms of their self-control. Great. Thank you. Thank you very much for filling that out. Now, remind me, do we start at this point?
Yep, you're good to go.
Okay, very good. Thank you. All right, so we're going to talk about personality, about personal intelligence, which is an intelligence about personality, and about coping with challenging times, which these certainly are challenging times. There we go. And some of my subtext is that my hope is that Dr. Glutting and I will be able at the end of our 40 minutes of presentation or so to help you be just a granular, just noticeable difference smarter about personality than before we started. And if we meet that goal, that would be terrific. So the organization of our talk today is How Are We Smart? Then being smart about personality, outside and in, and I think the outside and in will make sense a little bit more sense when we get to it. And then thinking with personal intelligence about our personalities, and then what do resilient people do? For example, how might we respond to challenges such as COVID-19? I'll start with how we are smart, and I want to go to a 1993. Boy, that sounds like ancient history now, doesn't it? But this is the current, most widely accepted model of how people think nowadays, of general intelligence. And so we've got a three-tier model or a three-stratum model. The first stratum here is general intelligence. And this model was an integrated model that was introduced in 1993, as I say, but it's garnered a lot of research right up to the present. And then at the bottom, we have a lot of specific tasks that people carry out, like making decisions quickly, understanding spatial relations, like how parts fit together in a jigsaw puzzle, understanding words and the like. And then in the middle, I'm going to be talking a little bit about this second stratum, which is referred to as broad intelligences. And these include specific areas of thinking, but they're fairly broad. So like visual spatial thinking or comprehension knowledge, long-term memory retrieval and so forth, and processing speed. I should mention I have 5 of these up here. There are somewhere between 10 and 15 now that have been proposed. Anyway, this 1993 model was pretty much occurred 3 years after, actually, Peter Salovey and I started thinking about the possible existence of an emotional intelligence. This is Dr. Salovey here. That is me in an earlier incarnation, an earlier version. And here's our 1990 article on emotional intelligence, where we argued, without knowing about these broad intelligences at the time, because this was 3 years before the model, that there might exist such a thing as the capacity, specific capacity to reason about emotions. Now, Peter and I still work together, but Peter right now actually is president of Yale University. And so we don't work together as much as we would like. He's busy managing, well, the COVID-19 matters at Yale University. Since that time, Peter and I, as I say, have continued our work on emotional intelligence. This is an update of our theory from 2016. And recently I've broadened the theory to include a personal intelligence, or a capacity to reason about personality. For one thing, we can't help but wonder about the people we see. And it's not just about their emotions. It's like, who are these people on the street around us? How are they behaving? Do we have to, might we like them? Do we need to fear them? And so forth. We watch people wherever they are. And in fact, in a lovely theory, the social brain hypothesis introduced by Ian Dunbar in Cambridge in 2007, he suggested that the human brain expanded in our evolutionary history specifically so that we could watch other people and understand their behaviors and reason about who they were, what they were doing, and whether, of course, they might be of benefit to us to know or danger to us. And so it became clear to me, though, that this 3-strata model that we were looking at before in the piece down here, it doesn't have an intelligence for that. It doesn't have an emotional intelligence. Here it is again. What's here are what I would refer to now as thing intelligences. And in the past, we've also called them cool intelligences or cold intelligences, as opposed to hot intelligences. And lately, I've been arguing that we need to, in the handbook of, let's see, I think it's called, oh, sorry, The Nature of Human Intelligence, edited by Bob Sternberg, that we need people-focused intelligences. And these would include emotional intelligence, personal intelligence, and social intelligence. Now, emotional intelligence, thanks to a grant by the Army Research Institute and ETS, and by a different research team than ourselves, emotional intelligence, using the test that we've developed at the University of New Hampshire, is now considered a member of these broad intelligences. It's been given full membership. Personal intelligence, we think, is not far behind. It shows every characteristic of being a broad intelligence. Social intelligence, which is an interesting case because since the 1920s, when it was first proposed, there's been a whole heck of a lot of difficulty researching it. And that just hasn't stopped right into the present. So this is actually the most questionable member of that set. So one thing I was thinking about when Jen asked me about participating in this is, well, how do we think about our personalities during something like an epidemic, or when our personalities become a tool, in essence, to adapt to a whole new set of circumstances. So I wanted to talk to you briefly about what personal intelligence consists of. And I think a good place to start is with where personality is. So we've got over here a diagram of that includes personality and its surrounding systems. So we've got, for example, the social groups and cultures to which personality belongs. We've got situations with which we interact. We've got the brain and our bodies, which underlie our personality. Like if we're not feeling well, that's going to influence our personality. And the settings, particularly, becomes important in the era of COVID-19. Where are we? Like if we're at home, that setting becomes much more important than it might have been in the past. So biological, yeah, I think I said all this, these each influence personality, and personality influences in turn each of these areas. In a challenge such as COVID-19, these areas all apply pressure on us, and we have to learn to interact in different ways with each of these systems than we have before. For example, we may have to set up, talking about settings, we may have to set up our house differently. Our relationships change and occur through Zoom or Skype or whatever the medium of your choice is, maybe the telephone. Our social groups were cut off to some extent from our social groups and may need to connect with them, make special efforts. And of course, we're concerned about our own health and the health of others. What about the inside of personality? Well, there we can think of personality as a system of functions. And there are a variety of different ways of dividing personality up. It's a complex system. But one way I like to do it is to think about 4 areas, and in particular, and these are pretty comprehensive areas covering personality. And they include, I've written about these in a number of journal articles, which are not listed here, but if you're interested, I can direct you to one of them or more of them. We've got motives and emotions, which is how we develop energy to get ourselves out of bed in the morning. Ideally, anyway. We've got knowledge. What is it that we know or need to learn in order to move forward? We've got an area of action implementation in which we're planning and acting in the outer world. And then finally, we've got executive consciousness, which is our conscious awareness and includes our capacity to self-control. And if you'll notice that those 4 questions that we asked about, where are you doing well and where you're feeling challenged, those correspond to these 4 areas that you're looking at now. In fact, I made a note that it's interesting, people were shying away from the self-control issue. 6% of the people said they were doing well in the area of executive control, consciousness or self-control, but also a similarly small number said that they were challenged there. So maybe we're not thinking about areas of self-control or self-change, and that's kind of an interesting matter that I noticed from the poll earlier. So we use these people-centered intelligences to understand ourselves and our functioning and how our personality is operating. And in a little while, Dr. Glutting is going to speak to you about sort of the ways that you can go through some of these areas and some examples of things that people might try to do successfully and unsuccessfully in order to cope and be resilient in those areas. And one of the ways that you can think about that is to kind of think of it as a puzzle, like which part of personality might be helpful to just slightly improve in these times, and how might I go about doing that? And sometimes if you take that kind of reflective stance, it can help you stay calmer about what's going on, which is helpful to all of us, right? So we might ask, are we panicked? Do we need help with energy development? Or is there something we need to know? Something we're discouraged about in how we're behaving? Or is the issue one of self-control? Or some combination of these as we go on? And so that actually does bring me to passing the baton over to Dr. Glutting, who will speak to you about how resilient people behave under these challenging conditions.
Hello, everyone. So I'm going to talk about what resilient people do. And resilience is simply the study of how people bounce back from adverse experiences. What makes some people better at this than others? And there's a lot of literature from many areas in psychology that really support the approaches that I'm going to be talking about. And when you think about this, you want to think about that psychology, the science of psychology, has informed the behaviors, habits of thinking, feeling, socializing, and perspective taking that help us become more resilient in the face of tough times. And you can think of these habits, strategies, and behaviors that improve coping as being housed in one of 8 areas that kind of fit into Dr. Mayer's theory that he's talking about earlier. So we can think of 4 of them as being sort of outside personality and 4 of them being inside personality. And you may find as we're talking about these that there are some that you feel really confident and really that are working well for you, and other areas that may need a little bit of shoring up and support. And so some of these things I'm going to talk about could fit in multiple areas, but just for the sake of this presentation, I'm kind of just going to put them in one. But if it feels like it fits in another place, you're probably right. So let's talk first about the areas that we consider external to our personality. The first one we're going to talk about here is the brain and the body. So there is a lot of literature about sleep and how important that is in coping and resilience and mood regulation. And we know that when people get significantly distressed, that sleep really can really fall apart and sort of become disordered. So it's very important when you think about being resilient in the face of challenges to really sort of try to be very strict about sleep and try to get to bed at the same time, wake up at the same time. Very basic information everybody knows. The second area is exercise. There's a body of literature that shows that exercise is really important in mood regulation. It's really important in managing anxiety. It's really important in managing depression. So that even if you get out, and by exercise, I mean even if you get outside for a walk, it doesn't have to be running a marathon, but that this is really helpful in terms of managing anxiety and mood dysregulation. The next area is what we call settings. And that is, you can think of sort of setting the stage for success, setting the stage for being more resilient. Okay, and so the first part here is choosing places to be. So if you have a space that you're going to be working from home, you really want to make that just for work. You want to make that space, that desk, that environment more likely to be productive. You don't ideally want to be in your bed. You want to be in some place where you are going to be working, because your mind is going to respond to the multiple cues to work. Likewise, when you want to have a space that you want to relax, you want to feel more comfortable, you want to surround yourself with things that cue you to relax. So I think one way of thinking about this is the 5 senses. You want to have things there that visually remind you of relaxing times. You want to have things that tactily might be comfortable. You want to have things that, flowers that smell good. Think of all 5 senses when you think of creating a space for that. And stimulus control will really help you in being more effective in work and also in relaxation. The second piece here is placing barriers between ourselves and temptations or bad habits. So if you find that during COVID, you've increased your alcohol intake or your sweets intake or your junky TV intake, you want to try and make those things harder to get to. So not bringing them into the house, limiting the amount that's there, making it more challenging to engage in some of these behaviors can be really helpful. Okay, so the next one that's external to personality is situations. And these are the things with which we interact. So in this particular situation with COVID-19, we really need to adapt to the situation. And for many of us, that can mean becoming more adept at different technological strategies. So becoming more adept at Zoom, becoming more adept at FaceTime, becoming more adept at ways that we can contact other people, but also being creative about this. I have a friend and she does a bedtime read via Zoom with her grandchildren who she can't be with right now. Other examples of this is my son recently did an outdoor movie with some friends, a small number of friends, all socially distant, put some sheets on the house and showed a movie. So finding new ways to be with each other that are okay and adapting to the situation. The next one I call garbage in, garbage out. And I kind of ripped this term off from early coders sort of in the 80s. And what they were referring to at that time is that when you code and you put a bunch of junk in, you get a bunch of junk out. You can think of this similarly for ourselves. If we are saturating ourselves with anxiety-provoking or distressing stimuli, it is not likely that we're going to get out of that relaxation and comfort. So thinking about what we focus on, what we spend our attention on, creates our reality. You can think of this also as selective attention. So if you spend all your time watching Game of Thrones, which is, can be a very anxiety-provoking and distressing thing to watch, also entertaining, you're not likely to feel very good. If you're on Facebook constantly with people who are very anxious, that probably isn't helpful for you. So thinking about how much time we spend in these various mediums that can cause us to be more distressed. We all have our popcorn viewing. That's what I call it. Popcorn viewing, popcorn reading. I'm a big murder mystery fan. I'm a big British baking show fan, even though I don't bake. But I call that my popcorn stuff. You also need to balance that with some more nutritional stuff, if you want to think of it that way. Nutritional reading, nutritional viewing, because that will really help to make you feel more comfortable. And also, when we think about Facebook as a strategy to connect, we also have to recognize that there is increasing data that it causes people to feel kind of bad. So there's sort of two ways in which that can happen. One is that, again, you're saturating with anxious people. The other is that there's these sort of, I don't know if other people have noticed this, I wish I could see all your faces, but often there's some sort of highly competitive, I can do COVID better than you and bake more and craft more and make more masks. And that's not going to make you feel great if you're constantly looking at that either. There's a concept in psychology called downward social comparison, meaning that we all want to feel just a smidge better than others. And if we're constantly feeling less than, it really doesn't make us feel good. And sometimes that hyper-competitive social comparison stuff can be really unpleasant, and we need to just minimize it. The next area that can be of concern is social groups and cultures. So this basically is the idea that we are social beings. Historically, when we want to punish people in society, we isolate them, right? We shun them, we put them literally in isolation. So we need to recognize that this is a very aversive thing for us, and we need to work against that. So even though you may not love Zoom, and I think we're all growing to really appreciate and loathe Zoom in equal measures, you need to make some space and time to do that. You need to do your book group via Zoom, even though it's not what you'd like to do. You need to find ways to be with other people, socially distant, walk, whatever works for you. But we need to find ways to stay connected, because it really is not in our makeup for most of us to really be totally socially isolated. It is very aversive. Okay, so now let's talk about the structures that are inside personality. And the first one is energy development. And energy development really is this idea of utilizing emotional information. So the first concept that I think is important to think about is this idea of examining your ambivalence, specifically when we think about trying to limit behavior. So for example, if I am drinking, and what I mean by that is, if there's a behavior we know is not great for us, like smoking, drinking, overeating sweets, whatever it is, we might know that it's bad, but we also need to recognize that we have some ambivalence about changing that behavior. So for example, imagine, this is not true, let me be clear, imagine I'm drinking 2 bottles of wine a night during COVID because I am. And I know this is not a good thing to do. And I know I need to stop it. Part of what I also need to examine is why I'm doing it. So I know that I don't like how I feel the next day. I don't like how I feel later that night. I don't like the things I do. But boy, that first half an hour might feel really good. I might feel relaxed. I might feel more socially skilled. And I need to recognize what this bad habit, for lack of a better word, and I know that's minimizing substance abuse, so please, I apologize for that, but recognizing what is keeping that behavior here. This is core to the second idea that's in parentheses here, which is the idea of forgiveness, meaning that if we have behaviors that we know are not great for us, but we know it serves some purpose, we have to recognize that, and then recognize that change is often like the tide coming in. It's like a wave. It goes back and forth and back and forth, and often there are for lack of a better word, relapses or mess ups. As long as you're going in the right direction, it's okay. I'm going to let Professor Mayer talk about the second point on this, in this area.
Thank you. The reason we're switching over here briefly is because one of the core ideas, perhaps the core idea that Peter Salovey and I spoke about when we were introducing our theory of emotional intelligence, and it remains the core of the theory today, is that emotions are signals. So every time we feel something, it means that something is going on, and often if our emotion system is working reasonably well, it's something that's going on socially, either referring to ourselves in the third person like we don't like ourselves or we don't like what we just did, or truly, or more interpersonally, that we don't like how we just treated somebody who we love, or we like how we treated somebody who we love, anything along those lines. So when we're feeling emotions, one of the helpful things to do, according to the theory of emotional intelligence, and this is very parallel to the theory of personal intelligence, one of the helpful things to do is not to be overwhelmed by the emotion, but rather to figure out, what is this emotion telling me about my environment, about my behavior, about me, and is there something I can do to change it in some way? In the same way, as Joan is talking about it, is there some way I can take what I know about personality and use that to better construct my environment, or to better work with my inner mental functioning? Thanks.
Okay. I was just adding a interesting chat question about when you're in a small space, how do you find the spaces to change the settings up, which was a good question. And I think, if I can just backtrack for a second, I think any chair you can find that you can be dividing these spaces, and it can be really tough, but to try to think about utilizing that space well. Okay, so the next area we have here inside personality is knowledge guidance. So I think this is very important. So knowledge guidance is sort of models of the self, beliefs and ways of thinking about yourself. This is really important during a period of uncertainty. So this first concept, I cannot underline enough, self-efficacy. And self-efficacy is simply the belief that you have in your ability to control your life. Really, really, really important. And we find this in animal models. We find this up to the existential psychotherapist gurus, psychologists. They shouldn't call them gurus. Basically, when an organism, even if bad things are happening, if you feel a sense of control in some area of the experience, you will do better. You will function better, and you will be more resilient. And this is really important in times of uncertainty about COVID. I was just on another Zoom meeting prior to this where people were talking about trying to plan for education going on in the fall. And what people have said over and over again is, well, the data keeps changing, the information keeps changing. And so that's really probably one of the bigger stressors about this, besides the social isolation, is the uncertainty. When will things open? When will I be able to get back to my life? So this sense of control is super important. So you need to try to build into your life or focus on the things you have control. You have control over your health behaviors. You have control over your sleep. You have control over how you manage your health risks. You have control over how you spend your time. And you have control over how you frame this experience in your life, right? Kind of leads to the second one, which is perspective taking. And perspective taking can involve your religious beliefs. It can involve your spirituality. It's really the idea of connecting with something bigger than yourself. So if I think about my life expectancy, which is somewhere in the 80s, this 2.5 month period is a very small portion of my entire existence, right? If you think about your belief about time, the universe, your existence, this still is a really small piece. If you look up at the stars and look at the solar system and the galaxy, this is a beyond a minuscule blip, which is not to minimize how unpleasant this can be and how hard this is for many people, but it's to recognize this is one part of your life. I was just thinking this morning as I was preparing for this, I was thinking about my grandfather and my grandmother. My grandfather was in the Navy, And he was gone for 6 years during World War II. And my grandmother was left, my Nana was left with 4 children for 6 years. And I think about that, and I think about this, and it really is helpful for me to think about in terms. But if you have religious beliefs, spiritual beliefs, you can put that in there. This also really ties into CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, and the idea of catastrophic thinking. So really trying to take this moment, recognize it's not pleasant, and put it in perspective. The next area we're going to go to is action implementation. And this is where most people think about control and behavior change. And actually, as you can see from what we're talking about here today, there's a lot more where you can impact how COVID is affecting you and how resilient you are. But this is the one that most people think of. So the idea here is remove or distance yourself from temptations. I've talked a little bit about that before, but it's really minimizing your exposure to things that are going to be troublesome for you. And then really good habit formation, trying to start some things that might be more helpful to you. For example, if weight management is an issue, maybe this is the time to start walking. But whenever you start good habit formation, you need to build in reinforcers. So you need to build in things that are rewards to keep those behaviors going. Okay, and the last area here is executive consciousness, right? So this is our awareness of ourself. 2 sort of really important ideas to think about here is mindfulness. I think everyone knows mindfulness, but I'll just give a real quickie. It's essentially the idea of being that we don't have control over the past, we don't have control of the future, and all we have is this particular moment that we're living in, moving through time. I had a very skilled clinician, actually works in the psychological and counseling services, come present this idea to one of my classes this fall, and he did a wonderful job. And just talking about this idea of focusing on the moment. And there's data that supports that this will make people less anxious. It will help them regulate their mood, and also helps them be more effective in the rest of their day, even just 10 to 15 minutes of this. But I was really reminded of it. I had just had a very unpleasant interaction where I felt like someone was sort of like not being respectful and not really listening to me. I was walking across our gorgeous UNH campus. I was walking through that ravine you all probably remember from behind the mud. We go over that little brook, and there's those beautiful tall pine trees. And I thought of his talk, and I thought, okay. And I was anticipating the meeting I was going to have next with this person and how I was going to try and manage it better. And then I sort of remembered his talk, and I thought, okay, in this moment, I am walking across this gorgeous campus. I am under these beautiful trees. I can hear the stream burbling. I'm walking amongst all these great students who are so wonderful. I'm going to prepare to teach my class, which I love to do with my students who I love to teach. And I thought, okay, in this moment right now, I'm actually happy. And I bet most of you, wherever you're sitting right now, are probably actually feel okay in this moment. And you might be, maybe you're bored at this moment. I have no idea. But generally, you're probably sitting somewhere comfortable. You're maybe you have a glass of iced tea. It's a gorgeous, summer day. Even though all of this awful stuff is happening, in this moment, you might feel okay. It's reminding yourself of that and using mindfulness techniques. And there's a bunch of them out there. You can choose anything. The last thing here is charting your progress. So one of the things we know about people is we tend to not recognize what actually makes us happy. And we aren't so great sometimes in recognizing what makes us unhappy. So this is really the idea of charting and recognizing how you're moving through any kind of change you want. One of the strategies I think about here that is effective, particularly and helpful now, is a gratitude journal. So a gratitude journal is simply writing down 2 or 3 things that you feel grateful for. The key here, though, is do it once a week. Don't do it any more frequently than that, because it doesn't have the same effect. But once a week, if you write down a couple things that you feel grateful for, that actually can improve your mood and make you more aware of the things that you value in your life. And having done this exercise with students in classes, I'm sure you all will know that when you go to do this, you'll discover that it's actually not things that you feel grateful for. It's people, it's nature, it's your pets, it's your interactions. It's, a great, I'm happy that Margaret Atwood exists every day. She's brought a lot of joy into my life. I love my morning cup of coffee. So it's not stuff. And that is really helpful to be reminded of during this time. What are the things that actually bring us happiness, and how do we have those in our life? Okay. So when thinking about resilience as a whole, it's just as important to think about what we do what we don't do as what we do, right? And I think we're going to go to the next slide here. Right. And it's really important to be kind to ourselves, to not kind of let go and say, oh, well, COVID's happening, I'm going to sit in my sweats and eat a chocolate cake every day, and drink a bottle of wine. That's probably not going to be a great strategy long term. But also, this is probably not the time to train for a triathlon and decide that you want to cut out all carbohydrates on top of everything else you've already given up. My youngest son, who's 13, early on in COVID, said to me, Mom, I want to do a 10-day vegan challenge. And I said, honey, I love you. I cannot do the 10-day vegan challenge right now. I've given up so much that I really need my salmon. I just can't do without it right now. I said, I promise you I will do this with you after this is done. So maybe that would be, I just recognized that was too much for me on top of everything else. So thinking about being kind to yourself that way, and remember that every change starts with one step, and set a small goal.
Great. We have questions that are coming in. If anybody who's listening has any questions, please pop them into the Q&A. Thank you so much to both of you for this awesome presentation. And we're going to go over some things that people are wondering about. One person asks, I'm wondering, with the emotion research completed, if the consideration of the gut microbiome, hopefully I'm saying that right,
yep,
research has been included as related to the impact of stress, the foods we eat, and therefore the impact on emotions, resilience, choices, and well-being.
That's really interesting, because we talked about that. We had that in the slide about eating well, and then we took it out.
Cool.
But absolutely, there is some beginning literature that really does connect how you eat and what you eat and how you feel. We know the connection between sort of carbohydrates and stress and dopamine. So absolutely, we kind of took that out the last minute because we felt like maybe that was outside of psychology more than inside. But I don't know what you think, Dr. Mayer.
I guess it's interdisciplinary, but I think probably eating well is good, but I think the connections between the microbiome and and our mental functioning is well established, but the problem is it's not well understood. So I think we're going to be waiting for a decade or so before we know, before we can give you recommendations beyond kind of the usual. We think having a good diet is probably much, much better for you than not having a good diet. Beyond that, I'm a little bit, my own, I'm not a specialist in the area, but my sense is that we may want to wait another 5 or 6 years before we better understand that.
I agree. Can I take a stab at this next question, because it's related to my comment about Game of Thrones?
Of course, yep.
So I think whatever you do for what I call your popcorn reading and viewing is no judgment. I have a real strong pull towards vampire movies, which is just, they're very, and if it helps you escape, I mentioned Game of Thrones only because it makes me anxious. All the sadistic violence, really, I think whatever makes you relaxed, you should do. I just think we need to think about if we're inculcating ourselves in constantly anxiety provoking, and you might find Game of Thrones just entertaining. It makes me anxious. So I guess no judgment on Game of Thrones at all. What makes one person relax and what makes one person happy is a different thing. The other thing I should mention here that I think is helpful is that, whatever you're drawn to read or watch is really important. And I remember a few years ago, almost 6 years ago, my mother was dying of cancer. And during the summer when she was at the end of her life, I was really drawn to reading very dark memoirs. So people who'd been boy soldiers in Somalia, and people who'd been in concentration camps, and who'd been soldiers in Vietnam. And I thought to myself, first I thought, oh gosh, you should stop reading this stuff. Going through this tough time, why are you reading stuff? It was very soothing to me because it was about people coping with end of life and what was the purpose of life, which was right where I was at. So and I just sort of stopped judging myself and let myself go. So watch your Game of Thrones if that's what makes you feel better. That's my short answer.
All right, So the next question is, the current political divide seems to be causing emotional responses. Is there a way to better reduce the tensions that are caused by that?
Here I will take a cue from Joan and say, I know that for me, I try not to listen to the news more than once a day. It is very stressful to hear what's going on. And I find there's, although my usual tendency is to listen to the news quite consistently, maybe several times throughout the day, I've just had to limit it and instead, replace it with music or just any other kind of diversion that will get me away from that. But I suppose a deeper answer would be that it's a signal. The stressfulness is a signal to us. I guess if I were going to apply emotional intelligence to it, and then the message that you take from that signal will vary depending upon who we are. For some of us, I guess myself included, my inclination is to say, I want less divisive political representation. I don't want people arguing quite so much. It just doesn't seem to get us very far. But other people may take that as a signal of a green light, gee, this is great. Let's get more and more divided and may the best side win. So we can treat the emotion as a signal, but then we have to figure out what is my reaction. I guess the personal intelligence part comes in with, well, what is my take on that signal? What do I think would be best to do with the signal I'm getting about that stress from the news?
And I think too, there's this piece of recognizing that when people are under this much stress, first of all, we don't know what everybody's story is, right? So we only know the surface. So people may have reasons that they feel so strongly that are beyond our knowledge of their lives. And sometimes it's trying to be patient with their anxiety or distress, which can be hard when you're anxious and distressed.
Awesome. Okay, the next question that came up is, how do you feel you can overcome the lack of motivation in daily work, especially when you're working in the same space or house every single day?
Oh, that's tough.
That's a tough one. Yeah, we're both a little tongue-tied there.
I'm finding that it takes me longer to do everything, and I'm finding, I do have 2 children, a junior high school and a high schooler here too, and it's really hard to keep them motivated. So I feel like I'm trying to keep, and then I'm trying to keep the whole family and my husband motivated, and it's hard. I think sometime it might be changing and adapting our expectations for this time period. And trying to build in and make a priority to some of those positive experiences that we need to have, and recognizing that depriving ourselves of them chronically isn't a great strategy. I'm not sure that's a great answer though.
I would probably add to that I've had an odd coincidence where not only am I in the staying at home mode, but I happen to be working on a project that's not terribly rewarding in and of itself. It's more like a stepping stone to something else. So I'm sort of doing some deep breathing around it and going, I'm using it as a time to rediscover, what is my purpose here? What am I trying to do? Yes, this seems very inconsequential in and of itself, but maybe it's, a stone among the stones while I'm crossing the river. I'm just going to step on, I'm using this as a stepping stone. It's the right stone. I need to understand it. And then I will go on in the future. But I agree, it's good to recognize that there are, as Joan pointed out, that there are a lot of extra obstacles to doing things, and there's a lot of ways that we get slowed down by doing everything, or at least many of our things from home.
Well, and I think Zoom is more ethical as a way to communicate. It's harder to communicate with people in these modalities because it seems to be taking more energy from everybody that I'm talking to.
Yeah, I agree with that. The whole Zoom fatigue is definitely a thing. The next question is, I am older and faring quite well. to generalize, though, it seems that younger people are not particularly resilient. Is this simply anecdotal or my observation, or is there work to show that this is the case?
May I answer this one, Professor Mayer, quickly?
Yeah, can we share an answer? Go ahead.
Yes, no, but that's definitely. So I think that, oh, it's just gone. Okay, I was trying to reread it. I think that, you know, one of the things that can make us resilient is perspective taking. And, you know, I have to say that when you've had a long life and many things have happened to you, you are able to put challenging times into a different context, right? So if you're a World War II veteran, or you, you know, a Vietnam veteran, or you've lived through the Great Recession, or a few other things have happened, this is one piece of your life. But when you're really young, this is the first big news. So when you think about how we grieve, the first loss, sometimes people say, is the one you go back to every time you have a loss. I do think the data on this group and resiliency has been misinterpreted. There's been some data about young people having higher rates of mental health problems. If you look at the data closely, it's self-report. Self-report of anxiety and depression is up, but we've really taught these young people to talk more about their feelings. And there's a very big difference between self-report of feeling anxious and an actual mental health disorder. So I think some of it is age related. I think some of it is a misinterpretation that has been popularized about that particular study, which I feel like I'm going to spend the rest of my life clarifying for people that self-reported anxiety is not the same thing as a diagnosable mental illness.
You know, that's such a good answer. I don't think I really have anything to add to it.
You don't need to add to it?
Do not need to add to it, no.
Great. The next question says, I am a professor too. We are teaching virtually. I think this is great information to share with our students. Do you agree?
Yeah, why not?
Sure. The next question is, I work with high schoolers. Many spend a lot of time in front of screens. They tell me that is what makes them happy. That is how they socially connect. It's very challenging to work with them on taking another perspective and to have them recognize the potential negative effects. School can be so stressful for some kids that after school they immediately retreat to their online world to feel good and accepted. Do you have thoughts on this, if that's good or bad?
The research is saying that jury's out, right? I mean, it's very mixed. Go ahead.
I have data-free perspective on this, which is that I think that's a lot of how they're socially connecting via Facebook, via online gaming. It's the only time they get to spend together. I do believe that it's really important for them to sleep. It's really important them for exercise. It's really important for them to get outside. It is important for them to have some structure around meals. And again, going back, you know, good food. So I think it's not judging them for that online way of their connecting, but also making sure that they are getting exercise, that they're physically moving their bodies, because it's really not great for them to sit all day long in the same room online for school and then for fun. But to balance it out is my thought. And again, I'm going to be clear, data-free on this, my opinion.
Yeah, I think we're all running a little bit blind for the next few years, although it's certainly been going on for a while. This is really, we may have to wait to hear what this generation says about being online all the time.
I know that my college students are really sick of Zoom. They really want to be with each other more than anything.
That's a good point. Yeah, when we left for spring break from UNH, I was surprised I asked my students what they would think if we went online, because it was not clear we would go online with the class at that point. And I was surprised to hear them say, because before this, you heard so many positive things about massively online courses and so forth. To hear them say, no, we really don't want to take, if we can avoid it, we would really prefer not to have the course online. Well, a number of us have tried very carefully to make it as positive an experience for them as it could be. But we sure miss them. I guess we don't mind that they miss us.
This is a great question. Any advice to managing different personality type children with regard to them being more patient with one another during these times? I'm encouraging patience and how grateful we should be compared to others, but that's not always understood by them.
I wish I knew how old these children were, because gratitude and patience depends so much on prefrontal cortex development, which really depends on how old you are, your capacity to do that.
They just wrote 16 and 11.
16 and 11.
Yeah.
Okay. So still lots of prefrontal cortex room to grow, since we are now estimating that it finishes in their 20s.
But maybe there's a
Professor Beer
concrete
wants
thing.
to say something, so I'm going to stop talking for a second.
I don't know if this is concrete enough to get around it, but one of the ways that personality psychologists have of speaking about this is that every trait, every characteristic that a person has advantages and drawbacks.
Mm.
And so you might point out that even though particular like shyness may be frustrating, to view from one perspective, that there are advantages to shyness. That even though introversion is very different, that even though extroversion can be very different from introversion, there are both advantages and drawbacks to extroversion. So one of the theories actually of in evolutionary psychology is that these traits developed are allowed to co-vary in the population because it helps us all if everybody's a little bit different and brings a different perspective to what's going on. If one of these traits was really maladaptive, the idea is that gradually, at least, it would be sorted out. But that often doesn't happen with personality traits. We vary quite a bit on them.
I think the other part too is that, I think as a clinical psychologist, it's hard to go straight to gratitude, probably allowing them to be validated that this is really stinky right now, that this isn't, that this is not pleasant, and then go to how can they feel grateful? How can they be patient?
Joan, I see we got a comment here also. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
From a participant who says that she wants to challenge the idea that children can't be expected to exhibit patience and empathy even from an early age. And I think that's correct. They can see empathy and take other perspectives, right? Even before their cognitive development is completed.
Well, I think empathy is probably one of the most complicated cognitive tasks people can do. It involves a lot. So if you think about it, in order to empathize, I've got to be able to accurately read your emotional state, which means I need to read your facial emotion, your body language. I need to understand the cadence, tone, and meaning, content of your language. Right. And because if I say this phrase, thank you, that means different things, right? Just the words are the same, but the way I moved my body and what I said. And then the second step, so I have to be able to take that in accurately. The second thing is I've got to then take that internally and kind of compare it to something and give it a label. What was that you were communicating? Was it disgust? Was it sadness? Was it happiness? And then I have to communicate back to you something that's appropriate to that feeling state. So it's quite a complicated idea. And it's not that we shouldn't start training people to do that at a young age. I'm just not sure how able a 2 or 3 year old is to do that.
Oh yeah, 2 or 3, yes, maybe so. But like at 7 or 8, don't you think that it's some element? Yes, I agree that what you're describing, I mean, that extremely high level empathy, definitely. Yeah. But couldn't we get to a child level empathy when a parent says, how do you think that makes your brother feel?
Right, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, you don't wait till they're 18 and start teaching them empathy. Yeah, I'm sorry if I miscommunicated that. Absolutely not. I mean, that starts at 2 or 3. It's just the capacity to be really good at it doesn't come for a long time, I think.
Yeah. And I should mention that we both invited one another to agree to disagree in places as we go along.
There's a question, you touched upon this a little bit, but I'm observing that more extroverted people seem to be struggling more than introverted people. I consider myself an introvert living with an introverted partner, and we feel like we are doing quite well, only mildly inconvenienced, recognizing our privilege for sure.
May I speak to that as a introvert?
Yeah.
I was thinking the other day, I was feeling guilty the other day because for an introvert,
I can't wait for this sentence.
For an introvert, I have to admit that I've taken certain pleasure from the lack of social contact on some days. But I'm extremely introverted. I have to hand it to my extroverted, the extroverts I know. I think it is, in some respects, it's harder for them. On the other hand, I think the advantage that they have is they do reach out more to others, and they do sustain the social contact that they need better, perhaps than we introverts do. For me, I think that it could become an excuse or a crutch to not reach out as much as I might otherwise.
Well, and I'm one of these people that falls on both sides. I can be extremely extroverted, and then I need my introversion time. But I think there's a different. And by the way, hi Paula. I just saw you in my last meeting. It's good to see you again. I think there's a difference between introversion and social isolation. So some of what's happening now, even if you're an introvert, and I think this kind of relates to another question that's on this list, it's too much, especially if you live alone, right? Because it's not just introversion, it's kind of a real social isolation, which is aversive for most people. But I think you're right. I think for some people, this hasn't been super stressful in a lot of ways because they don't mind it. And for other people, there is a difference. So I agree with you. I need human contact a little bit more. So.
And I should say I'm staying at home, but I have 2 other people in my home, so I'm far from all alone. Yeah.
The next question says, sessions like this are helpful to understand how people are processing the situation. I manage a team of software engineers who are a bit introverted by nature and now working remotely. Some are quite adaptable and resilient, but the individuals that live alone are really struggling. I'm trying to support them as best as I can, but feel a little unprepared. Any additional tips?
May I start? So I think thinking outside the box and recognizing that they may need a little bit more contact from you at this point. An extra half an hour in Zoom that's just individual. If you can manage a socially distant walk, that's a great idea. If you can manage, there's some great stuff where teenagers have been going to like McDonald's and sitting in cars next to each other. They're far away, they're not touching each other, but they're having a conversation. Maybe if you think someone's really struggling, make a lunch date with them. I know people that are living alone, and I've made efforts to really reach out to them because I know that I might be the only person that's able to do that right now. So I think you're on the right. I think you're recognizing that need, and I think anything adaptive and creative you can do to do that is really helpful. And it can be anything.
The next question says, there has been talk about needing to shift to a 4-day work week. What are your thoughts on the benefits of this?
Professor Mayer, I have no idea.
I mean, I don't feel qualified to speak to that really. What is the person's thought about that? What do they think? Or what are some of the issues that are coming up between a 4 and a 5-day week?
I'm sure most people would be very receptive to a 4-day work week.
So we're going to go with Jen's answer on this. Jen Woodside says thumbs up to 4-day work week.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know. I mean, it's hard for you all because your schedule is a little bit different, I feel like, as faculty than.
Well, I think I mean, it's I guess one of the things that we're learning, and one of the things before COVID-19, right, is with all this interconnectivity, are we already working in some sense 7 days a week?
Mm.
I mean, I discourage emails over the weekend, but it doesn't matter how much I discourage them. That is to say, work emails over the weekend, but it doesn't matter how much I discourage them. I get them, and lately I've been sending them too. You know, if I must. So, is it 4 days in the office and then 1 day at home? That may have a lot of really good ecological benefits. It maybe have some good mental health benefits because we can be a little bit more flexible. On the other hand, I think the other thing people are raising, I believe that Facebook just said that they want their employees to work more from home as a permanent alteration in work environments. These are very interesting transitions.
Mm-hmm. A question says, I was told by a mental health clinician in an internship program to not use the word resistant when talking about a youth's behavior. For example, that youth is resistant to sharing, resistant to answering the question. Some people use the word resistant as a personality type. Is this language not helpful?
I believe that language is not helpful. It's not really the kind of terms that we use right now, and it really is blaming of the client, blaming of the youth. When people don't want to do something, it's a much more helpful thing to go back to that idea of examining the ambivalence, right? What is behind that? Why are they not doing what you want them to do? And then the other question is, are you in line with your client? Do you understand what they want? What drives them? Maybe you don't get what moves them forward, specifically with adolescents.
And as a researcher, I would say maybe motivated in a different direction.
Right. And also, you know, adolescence developmentally is a time when people want to feel more of their own autonomy. So coming in, telling them what to do all the time is pretty much a guaranteed failure strategy with an adolescent. So thinking about, okay, which are the things that they have to do? You have to not speed when you drive. You have to finish your schoolwork. But you can't, but can we have flexibility on some of these other pieces? So I think the term resistant is really pejorative. It's very old school to kind of talk like that. And it has nothing to do with personality disorders or personality, when we think of the clinical side, you know, in terms of diagnostically. So I kind of agree with your supervisor there on that one.
All right, that was the last question. That was the most questions we've ever, well, as far as since I've been doing these webinars, the most questions. So that was a great discussion. Thank you so much. You had a great answer to every single thing.
And thanks so much to the people who are still with us and who are asking these questions too, because it's lovely to have this interaction with you and to be able to go back and forth like this.
Great, thank you. We will follow up to this webinar with an email so that you can share it'll be in the library if you want to share it with others, and we will share some information as well in the email from the presentation and details about some upcoming webinars. So thank you to both of you, Joan and John, and thank you to everyone that tuned in.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.